Welcome to AINdebrief, where we take a look back at the most important aviation stories of the past week by the AIN editors who covered them. I'm AIN Alerts editor Chad Trautvetter. In this week's episode, AIN's senior editor Curt Epstein gives a lowdown on the new Canada Advanced Air Mobility Consortium. I'll provide highlights of Gulfstream's third quarter results. Senior editor Jerry Siebenmark details the third quarter results of Textron Aviation and Boeing. And London-based editor Charles Alcock talks about Airbus's third quarter and also Mitsubishi's decision to shelve its SpaceJet regional airplane. So, Curt, this week, a Advanced Air Mobility Consortium launched up in Canada. So what's the purpose?
Well, yeah, yesterday was the worldwide launch event for the Canadian Advanced Air Mobility Consortium, Chad. And what this group is they have gotten together and they want to really stoke the fires on this advanced air mobility sector, particularly up in Canada. They want to get all Canadian industry involved in this. They have about 20 launch members, including academia, government agencies, manufacturers, OEMs. So they want to really kind of spur this in the Vancouver area.
And what's their goal? I mean, I see that they have zero emission aircraft.
Yeah, their goal obviously is to align with the plans of Canada and Vancouver and the region, all these plans for zero net emissions. So the technologies that they're really looking on are the electrically powered, hydrogen powered. These are things that they really want to do to make a real dent in what they view as the greenhouse gas emissions plan. So during the launch event, one person even asked, are hybrid aircraft being considered? And they're no. So they're not going to say we don't want them here, but that's not the technologies that they're looking for. They're looking for zero emission technologies.
So why do they choose Vancouver to do this in?
Well, Vancouver, as they say, is a mature market for this. People are used to short air transport. You have HeliJet International, which is the world's largest scheduled helicopter flight provider. And they've been there for almost 40 years. And as I said, it's a mature market according to them. People are used to the concept of using a rotorcraft to get where they have to go and throughout the entire region. And you consider that's not just Vancouver. You've got the entire Northeast corridor, which is Seattle, Portland as well. So that's why they chose this. And it's also a very willing market as far as environmental goes. And they think that such things would really play well to the audience, so to speak. So they've chosen Vancouver. The president and CEO of HeliJet actually described Vancouver as sort of a petri dish. So the goal is to basically develop these technologies in Vancouver and move them to adoption, and then basically export them to the other major cities in Canada. And one of the other parts of this is they want to basically act as an incubator to take small and medium companies and take their technologies from a low state of readiness all the way up through the commercialization process. So this is a full phase initiative from manufacturing all the way up through government and regulation, through the OEMs and to the operators. So it's a real whole system that they want to work on.
Did they have any kind of timeline laid out? What are they looking for as far as when they introduce zero emissions eVTOLs into Vancouver, and then how long until they can get it across the country?
Well, somebody asked J.R. Hammond, who is the executive director of CAM, do you have any idea about certification of any of these? And he deflected, obviously. He pointed to Transport Canada and said he'll let them speak. He doesn't want to put any words in their mouths. But he did go to say that by 2025, they would expect to have the first real AAM aircraft operating in Vancouver, and whether that takes the form of just mere cargo carrying aircraft or that's a passenger aircraft, that remains to be seen. Now, one of the founding members was Bell, and they've got a couple projects that are underway. They've got this. They've got a small drone-sized aircraft that they call the Autonomous Pod Transport, or APT. and this is something they're testing currently. It recently flew a 10-mile circuit around Fort Worth, where it basically tested out its detect and avoid technology and its beyond visible line of flight controls. So that's something that could deliver up to 70 pounds of cargo. So that's something that they're obviously looking to maybe get working there. And then also Bell has the Nexus, which is it's a 4-engine personal transport, and that's something that I saw at the Consumer Electronics Show earlier this year. They had it displayed there, and that's something also that they're looking to put there. But as Bell put it, they're thrilled to lend their expertise to government and industry partners to develop a integrated AAM ecosystem. So they're a major airframer, a major manufacturer that's looking to be a big part in this.
So does that mean that this is both a mix of cargo and passenger ops then they're looking for?
They're looking for a full suite. They have a white paper out that's developing the use cases for such technology. Danny Sitnam, the CEO and president of HeliJet, he thinks that first responder would be a very apt application for this. I guess ambulance technology, bringing these things where they into places where there's a need for emergency medical evacuation. Also transporting essential and quick things such as organs and medicines and other supplies into devastated areas that are not very well served by other forms of transportation. So one of the major criteria on this is that it has to be multimodal, and it also has to be non-exclusive. So they're not just working on this just so that the one percenters in Canada can have a nice, easy way to fly from their office to their home. They want to make this accessible, and they want to make this a ubiquitous part of the environment. So that's lofty goals, but we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, is there any money behind this? Is the government funding this, or is there grants for developing this technology, or is it just all funded by the members themselves?
They didn't go into it, but you have some groups such as the National Research Council of Canada. You've got some universities involved, and you've also got the British Columbia Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. So there could be some government funding involved there. They were kind of not very detailed about that, but there could be. And this is just getting onto its feet now. They say it's taken about a year to get all their ducks in a row to launch this, and we'll see how it plays. So I heard that you had some Gulfstream news this week.
Yeah, actually, General Dynamics did their third quarter call this week on Wednesday, and they delivered 32 airplanes in a quarter versus 38 last year. So they're kind of getting back up to pre-COVID levels. Of those 32, they delivered 25 large cabin jets, and they said that the G650 continues to be the biggest share of that, but they wouldn't give a number on that. In the first 9 months, they delivered 87 airplanes. 71 of those are jets, and then 16 are the mid-size G280s, or I guess super mid-size, sorry. And that's versus last year at 103, when they delivered 24 super mid-size and 79 large cabin.
So you said that they're winding down the G550.
Yeah, the G550 is going to phase out next year. But for this year, they expect deliveries to end at about they previously gave a range of 125 to 130, and they said they're going to be at the top end of that range, so they're looking for 130, which means that deliveries for the fourth quarter should be 43, and that's almost as much as fourth quarter last year at 44. So Gulfstream will be pretty much back up to pre-COVID levels by the end of the year as far as deliveries. However, like you said, the G550's phasing out, and they said that because of that, they expect deliveries to be down a little bit next year. Apparently the G500 and G600 just aren't making up for the G550 sales quite yet. And I guess, in the COVID environment, it's harder to complete the sales too. Phoebe Novakovic at General Dynamics, parent company of Gulfstream, she said that sales are just taking longer to complete because of the pandemic. So their deliveries this year are going to be a little bit less than last year, but not too bad. and then they expect next year to be a little bit harder. Although she did say that if things pick up, that they can spool up production of the G5 and 600 as well as the 650 if they need to. But she also sees slower sales next year for the super midsize G280. But overall, she said that demand is a little bit down in the U.S., and she attributed that to the economy, the uncertain election, which will be over in less than a week, hopefully, and also pandemic-related travel restrictions. It's COVID. So once we can get a handle on COVID or find a vaccine, that they see that as being turning the tide for the industry, and they see that sales will go up after that. So that's the news from Gulfstream and General Dynamics. But there's also some other third quarter results this week. So Jerry, you listened to the Textron call on Thursday morning. So what did Textron have to say?
Well, Textron actually, for the second quarter in a row, posted a loss. However, the CEO of their parent company was surprisingly upbeat about their prospects going into the fourth quarter and even the first quarter of 2021. And that was driven largely by the fact that he said that the company during the third quarter saw a nice pickup in light and mid-size jet orders, as well as for the King Air. They still, for the quarter, they delivered 25 citations and 21 turboprops, and that was down from the same quarter last year when they delivered 45 citation jets and 39 turboprops. So Scott Donnelly is still expecting a 30 to 40% decrease in deliveries this year compared with last year.
Did he talk about what they expect next year, or is it a little too soon for that?
Yeah, he would not. No, he wouldn't really go into that. Other than he did say that the one thing he did say was, what they saw from customers in this third quarter is giving them a little better visibility into the first quarter of 2021. So, and which he's optimistic about.
And I guess they expect a boost next year from the Sky Courier, right?
No, he was really talking about. I don't think he was talking about the Sky Courier. I think he was. I think he was really talking about the continuation of demand for light and mid-size citations.
Right, but they expect the Sky Courier will enter service next year, right?
Yes, they're expecting. They're expecting certification and entry into service in the second half of 2021. Which, by the way, that's the first time they've given any sort of real dates on when that new airplane would begin deliveries.
And that would ostensibly go to launch customer FedEx next year, right?
Right, that's correct.
Did they talk about their single engine turboprop, the Denali? Did they give any update on that?
He didn't talk about the Denali. The conversation focused primarily on their existing airplanes, what they're seeing from their customers, their fractional customers such as NetJets, and then Wheels Up, and sort of postulating what that all means moving forward.
Yeah, you mentioned that the King Air has seen a little bit of a resurgence. Is that due to the new King Air 360, or is this the 90 and 200 series models that they're seeing demand for?
That's a great question, Chad, and one. And unfortunately, I don't have the opportunity to ask any questions. So I'm kind of at the mercy of the analysts, and they didn't ask that question. So I really don't have a sense for the demand for the King Air, if that's coming for the 360 or for the existing models.
Okay, thanks, Jerry. And also, you listened to the Boeing third quarter conference call on Wednesday, and actually, the news is kind of much worse there. Boeing is kind of hurting right now, right?
It really is. Obviously, we're all pretty familiar with, and if you're not, you're living in a cave. But we're all pretty familiar with the effects of COVID-19 on the airline industry, and obviously the airline industry is end user Boeing products. So as the airline industry goes, so goes Boeing, and
yeah, but they also went into this pandemic with a problem already, which was the 737 MAX, and they have a bunch of airplanes sitting around too, and they couldn't, they couldn't deliver anything because it was grounded because of the accidents. So Boeing has kind of a double whammy almost, right?
Yeah, they really do. I mean, they have 450 MAX aircraft that are literally ready to go, but no one to take them. Interestingly enough, they also have about 50 787 Dreamliners that they haven't been able to push out the door quite yet either, and that's more related to quality issues coming out of their South Carolina plant.
And that's where they're shifting all their 787 production to.
Exactly.
So how bad was Boeing's financials for the quarter? And did they talk about, I know they're looking to get rid of some property up in the Seattle area. Did they talk about also what they're doing with the 787 plant up there in Everett, now that they're shifting everything down to South Carolina?
They have no firm plans for their real estate at this point. Obviously, they build their. You're correct. I mean, they build the 787 in both in the Seattle area and in South Carolina, and obviously with that move to South Carolina, that leaves a lot of freed up square footage, and there was no real sense from Boeing on when they might have an idea of what they're going to do with the property, if it possibly could be, if the lines, the 737 lines in Renton could be moved up there to Everett, if perhaps they would use that extra space for any new market, middle market airplane that they might build. That was all sort of up in the air. In terms of their financials, they reported a net loss of $466 million, and that compared with just a year ago they had a net profit of over $1 billion. So yeah, it's tough times at Boeing. They're also looking at actually cutting more jobs than they had initially planned. Dave Calhoun, the president and CEO, said that he expects the company's total workforce to be about 130,000 people by the end of next year. You compare that with going into COVID, before before the pandemic, they had as many as 160,000 people. So you're really looking at 30,000 fewer jobs at Boeing.
Well, that's pretty devastating. All right. Thanks, Jerry.
You bet.
So we heard what Jerry said about Boeing, Charlie, and you listened to the Airbus quarterly call. They're not quite as shell-shocked, right?
Yeah, I think shell-shocked is a good way of characterizing this. So if you just look at the numbers that came out from the Airbus results announcement this week, of course, predictably, they're bad. Revenues for the first 9 months of the current year, 35% down. And that's mainly, almost completely, in fact, due to the decline in commercial airliner deliveries, which are 40% down. And, the bottom line, it's all too apparent. There's an adjusted loss of 125 million euros, which, at the beginning of the year would have seemed inconceivable for Airbus, given their backlog. But by the same token, what I did sort of pick up from the CEO, Guillaume Faury, is that they at least now feel they have a complete understanding of what the COVID crisis has meant to them. And they've done a lot of work since they announced their last results to get on top of how they need to adjust production rates and how they need to recalibrate the company to deal with this new harsh reality. So, for example, in the most recent quarter, they've managed to reduce the number of aircraft that couldn't be delivered specifically because of COVID problems to 135. Now, you might think in a normal year, gosh, if you couldn't deliver that many aircraft, that would be bad. But in relative terms, that's actually progress, because earlier this year, frankly, they pretty much admitted they didn't have a clue what was going to happen and how many orders were going to be canceled and so on. And what do they say? A problem's always a lot easier to grapple with when you actually understand the problem. They also reported that they've made progress in their talks with employees and other stakeholders. Remember, this is heavily unionized Europe, where you can't just casually announce a bunch of layoffs. You have to, jump through a whole set of hoops and discussing those with the stakeholders. So I think now at least the management team there at Airbus feel, well, we've got a way to manage this crisis. It may not get better in a year or even two, but at least now we have some sort of recovery plan.
Well, actually, I was going to ask, what are they seeing in the years ahead? What about 2021, 2022, 2023? Are they expecting more of a recovery, full recovery by 23?
I don't think they feel comfortable saying when a full recovery will come. What's interesting is, normally when public companies publish financial results, they give you some projections for, how's the complete financial year going to look and what might next year look. Airbus very pointedly said, no, we can't get into that business of telling you exactly how we think things are going to play out. So they're pretty cautious. But having said that, a few months ago, in so many words, they said they don't really expect a complete recovery to the level of air transport demand that we had in 2019 until, I think, 2023 or even 2024. And that seems to be the consensus among many companies who build, commercial aircraft. I think the question is, who has deep enough pockets and who has the right plan to get through these next 2 or possibly even 3 years before the recovery comes?
Right. Are they talking about adjusting production on the larger aircraft? I know the wide bodies have been kind of a sticky point during the pandemic.
They're very definitely having to decrease the production rates for the wide body aircraft. They didn't actually specifically say by how much yesterday, but it's all too apparent in the actual delivery numbers. During the 9-month period, there were far more of the single aisle aircraft still being delivered. So mainly the A320s, but some of the A220s as well. There were over 300 of those two categories of aircraft delivered. But then between the A350, the big long-range jet, and then the A330, there were barely 40 aircraft delivered. And it seems pretty clear that sort of balance of demand is going to continue, I would say, at least into 2021. And so I'm sure that's going to be reflected in the production rates. And I think that's what Guillaume Faury was talking about. We now know what reality looks like, and so we can adjust to it, and you'll see that in their factories next year.
All right. Well, actually, speaking of adjustment, on Friday, Mitsubishi kind of has thrown in the towel under SpaceJet, right?
Yes, essentially it has. And this wasn't entirely unexpected. I mean, even before COVID, this was a somewhat troubled program to build roughly speaking, a 90-seat regional airliner. It had had numerous delays. It was years behind schedule. They had hoped at the beginning of this year to really step up flight testing at their new base in Washington State. But what they announced today is strictly speaking, a suspension of the program. In other words, they haven't said we're giving up on the whole thing. You'll never see this thing again. They're very, very careful in the announcement that's been made by Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, which is the parent company, but they're saying we're suspending the program. They say that they're going to essentially stop all engineering and flight test work, but they will keep working on the so-called documentation for type certification, which essentially means they'll keep the file open. And they do say that they will actively reconsider this and possibly restart the program. Now, of course, that begs the question when. And elsewhere in the financial figures that Mitsubishi released today, they said basically they don't expect to see any significant recovery in the commercial air transport sector until 2024. And they kind of implied it's 2024 when things will start to recover, not when they'll necessarily be fully recovered. So, logically, you might think that this suspension, if it does prove to be a temporary suspension, could easily last, a couple of years. And then the question that begs is, well, this thing is already 13 or so years late, I think, something like that. Maybe not quite. No, actually, it's not quite that late. It's more like 7 years late. I beg your pardon. If they wait another 2 years, how relevant is this going to be? By then it could be close to a decade late, and you have to then wonder, well, how viable will it be against the aircraft that it's competing with?
Well, they also bought the CRJ series from Bombardier, so they own the rights to manufacture that. That would be the quickest path to a 90-seater for Mitsubishi, right?
That is true. And yes, they do. In the statement that they made today, Mitsubishi did say, yes, we're going to keep the CRJ program going. Now, again, this was a very carefully worded statement, a very sort of traditional sort of Japanese conservative corporate approach to communicating things. They said they'd keep the CRJ going, but I think they mainly mean in the first instance that they'll keep the maintenance, repair, and overhaul services going, because they do still support already in service aircraft. But they did kind of imply that, they're keeping that open as an option, possibly for further production. And, who knows, maybe what they'll look to do is to somehow rework that design. That would mean essentially just shrugging their shoulders and, abandoning all the blood, sweat, and tears and money that they've thrown into the M series Mitsubishi aircraft. But, these are really seriously tough times. And what's clear is if you look at the whole Mitsubishi industrial group, including the cars and all the other things they do, it's in aviation that they've taken most of the pain. That's really where they're hurting.
Right. Well, and I guess having that customer base at least gives them an option to market whatever airplane they have to those customers.
Yes, that's right. They do have a pretty well established position now in aviation. Of course, at the same time, aerospace, even in bad times, isn't going to stand still. So we've already got, potentially Airbus talking about what's going to come next in a narrow body aircraft. Might it be some sort of hydrogen powered plane in the next decade? At the same time, Comac in China still in play with its C919 series aircraft and its ARJ regional jet. And, China, despite everything it's been through with COVID, industry there is now beginning to recover. So again, it takes us back to that point. Yes, Mitsubishi is calling a timeout and saying we're suspending this program. But where will the competitive field be in 2 years' time if they then say, well, maybe we'll restart it now?
Right. Well, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Very definitely.
All right. Thanks, Charlie. Thanks for listening to AI in Debrief. Another podcast episode will air next Friday. In the meantime, go to www.ainonline.com for the latest aviation news from AIN.